while it was in my childhood days. Oh, Lord, a minute.
Hello and thank you for joining us. Welcome to Community Connection Hour, presented by San Jose Public Library. During the month of February, we will use this time and space for our second annual Black History Month speaker series. Our guest speaker for today is San Jose Public Library's District 5 Senior Librarian, Tiffany Bradford-Oldham. And if you have any questions, please ask in the chat and we'll be more than happy to answer them for you. We can take questions in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. And for more information about our programs, please check out www.sjpl.org. And Tiffany, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Jeff. We just want to let you know a little bit about Tiffany. First of all, we're so happy to have you, Tiffany, sharing living history with us. Tiffany is a core member of the San Jose Public Library's racial equity team and is passionate about equity, diversity, and inclusion work being integrated into all elements of library work. Prior to joining the San Jose Public Library, Tiffany worked as a librarian with the National Instructional Materials Access Center digital repository for K-12 visually impaired students. Tiffany was a high school and college debater with a degree in political science and a focus in international relations, and was a community activist. Tiffany fervently believes in the importance of exposing children to topics about race, equity, and diversity, and helping them cultivate their understanding, opinions, and ideas throughout adulthood. Please help me in welcoming Tiffany.
Thank you, everyone, for showing up, because I didn't expect to see this many folks. So I am, of course, hopefully you can see my screen. I'm showing it in a PDF version because I have an embedded audio file. My grandmother was not able to join us. She actually has a cardiologist appointment today, right at this time, but she did do a recording ahead of time so that she could share out some of her earliest memories. So I just wanted to, of course, kind of give a little bit of background before I jump into her words, because you're not here to hear me. So this is an image of my little family, so to speak. To the left of me is my grandmother, who you will hear. To my right is, of course, my mother. And then the person at the far end, the one who looks gigantically tall, that is my aunt. Do not be fooled, we are short people. As you know how short I am, that is my mother next to me, so she is shorter. So just wanted to let you know who everyone is in this picture, because you will also hear my aunt, who is kind of helping direct my grandmother kind of go through her memories, because she's got to go a ways back. But to give you a little background of what she's talking about is I'm sharing with you a little bit of the history of my individual family. And the reason why I wanted to do that is what we're trying to do this year is celebrating Black voices. And in thinking about celebrating Black voices, that also means not just celebrating the folks who are out here being activists, but the everyday folks, the individuals who have the living history. My grandmother is over 100 years old. And so she's recounting her memories from her childhood. And the reason I wanted to focus mostly on the things and elements of her childhood is I wanted to put in perspective that this is my grandmother. This is living history. The things that she's talking about are not things that are in the ancient past for her. This is her life. And I think a lot of the times when we start talking about race and history, we always think of it as something that was happening years and years and years ago, and things are, you know, in the past, they don't continue, that's done. But in reality, those issues, those things, they're not as far away as we think. And that's kind of the perspective I want everyone to keep in mind. For me, I am the 5th generation from slaves. So essentially that means that not my great grandmother, but my great-great were born enslaved. This is something that, you know, we have to keep in perspective. On my father's side, I'm even a little closer. It would be my great-grandfather who was born enslaved, because my father was actually a little bit older than my mother if he was still alive. I mean, my grandmother, excuse me. So I just want you to keep in mind that this history is not so far ago. And so I wanted her to share what her life was like growing up in Louisville, Kentucky, which is where I'm from. And in the image that you see, you're seeing a little bit of a few little screen caps of images from early Black Louisville as what they would call Little Africa. Now, the main thing that's really significant, and you'll see like right at the end of my presentation, is Louisville was a segregated city. It's in northern Kentucky in a way, but it's not considered truly the North and not really considered truly the South. It's something that's a mix in between. And so what you'll, you know, see and hear about is kind of that weird kind of mixture that Louisville is. One of the things I wanted to, you know, make clear is the segregation and the way that Louisville was built back then is exactly how it is now. So when you heard about the things happening with Breonna Taylor back in 2020, and they were talking about where she lived and it was called like the Russell neighborhood. Well, the Russell neighborhood is an area in Louisville, Kentucky that is past what we call 9th Street. Anywhere past 9th Street was considered West Louisville. Again, like I said, Louisville was a truly segregated city. And this, you know, if this image gives you any kind of indication of how that looked, this is how it looked back then. This is like 1927. My grandmother, of course, would have been a little girl at this time, but this is kind of what Louisville was like. We had a very segregated community. Anywhere past 9th Street in Louisville was considered West Louisville. It still is considered that today. And a lot of the things and the problems and the injustices that you see that were sparked and discussed when the death of Breonna Taylor happened, all still spurns from this divide in the city of the Black half of the city versus the white half of the city. So I just wanted to give you a kind of a little bit of a glimpse of what that kind of looked like with this image here, which is the Louisville Electric Company. They had a little dinner, and as you can see, if you notice who's all got a seat at the table, there's nobody Black. Everybody Black is serving. So this is kind of the setup of what early life in Louisville was like. So to give a little bit of context about West Louisville, West Louisville is predominantly a Black neighborhood. However, it's not always been traditionally seen that way. In the 1830s, that was when a lot of the free Black people were allowed to start buying property west of 9th Street. And there was another area called Portland. I won't go into a lot of details about Portland, except for Portland was actually technically a bigger city at the time than Louisville. And then Louisville at some point decided that they wanted to be the center. And so they kind of broke up Portland. And so Portland was a mixed community of immigrants that were from Germany and from Ireland, and they had a lot of Jewish immigration, and it was Black as well. And the city of Louisville was kind of, okay, I'll be honest, it's a shady place. So it broke up the area of Portland and West Louisville by doing a lot of little things to kind of divide up the city. They built the expressway at some point right in the middle of that area. They started doing things such as, you know, blocking it off so it's difficult to get there. And that stuff still exists today. And that is a problem that while it seems like it's ancient history, the repercussions of that are still existing. Like I said, Breonna Taylor lived in the Russell neighborhood, which is in that area. And one of the reasons why there was a thought that she was, you know, gunned down in her home was they've been trying to get people out of that neighborhood to push the gentrification that has been happening from downtown Louisville further west. Because in the West End, there is some really nice land and property, but it's been depressed for many, many years economically. And so it's allowed this kind of undervaluing of the property, and it makes it easier for investors to rush in and buy it up. So that is kind of one of the things that, you have to, keep in mind when we're thinking about what things look like back then and how that is affecting things now. And so this is another kind of image of what Louisville kind of looked like back then. And I will honestly say it kind of looks the same. This is a street off Greenwood and I think 27th. That house that you see is still there in that same spot. Same trees are still there. Everything is there except for maybe the folks that live there, and the road has gotten a little bit better. And the key word in that is a little bit better, because West Louisville is also still economically underdeveloped. So they're the last, unless they're on a snow emergency lane, to get roads fixed or replaced or anything of that nature. So I wanted to stop talking for a little bit, because you're not here to hear me. So you're here to hear about my grandmother's early life. And so I wanted to take some time to let you hear her voice. And my aunt is the one talking to her and trying to get her to pull some things from her early childhood of what life was like for her. So she's only kind of recounting up until about, I want to say 1937. And that is when Louisville had the Great Flood. Well, no, strike that. She goes up to like 1940, because she does talk about her brothers when they went off to the war. So I want to kind of let you hear her for a little bit, just so you can get perspective on how she grew up. So you might have to listen real hard, because I think my volume's up as loud as it will go, because my grandmother is very soft-spoken. Actually, she's known for not talking very much, but let me give it a shot again. All right. I do realize my grandmother talks very, very lightly, but.
Thelma, Frazier, Goff. Frazier was my maiden name. And I went to Virginia Avenue Elementary school until I got to the 6th grade, and then we went to high school.
What year was you born?
Well, I went to school when I was 6 years old.
What year was that? Well, you was born in 1922.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what she's gonna go with.
You went to school and you were 6.
Yeah.
And you said that y'all didn't have buses. How did y'all get around? What you say? What you tell me about it?
That was.
You said something about how they didn't have buses.
They had what?
Buses?
Buses. We had a streetcar and run on track. And sometimes we walked to school when we were in high school. Sometimes we walked to school. And like we said, we didn't have electricity. We had for light. We had lamps. We used I guess a kerosene in the lamp to make the light. That's a thing we caught off fire, don't we had put oil in the lamp, some kind of oil, and it had a wick. Thing was called a wick, and the lamp. You had to light the wick, and they had a chimney that you put on the lamp, like a lamp in there.
Right.
That's what we used in the old days for light. So we didn't have electricity. And for water, some people had pumps and some people had wells. And my dad would get the water out of the well or something, and we had coal stoves for heat.
What's the cold stove?
Even for cooking, we have coal stove, and for heating the room, we had coal stove.
What's a cold stove?
Well, we had to use a lump coal in for fire. You know, for heat.
You light them with a match?
Yeah, we had to put some kiln in there, what you call a little piece of wood chip to put in there with the coal and some paper and stuff in there. And like that, and then put some coal in there. And then all that would start burning. And that would make heat for the room. And for water, I told you about water.
Yep, so yeah.
Okay, and when we got ready to wash our clothes, we had to heat the water. And we wash in a tin tub with a washboard. We wash our clothes with, the soap powder and stuff. Had to rinse them. And then we hung our clothes outdoors. We didn't have no dryer or nothing like that. We had lines out in the door. And we hang our clothes out to dry. And for the iron the clothes, we didn't have electric iron. We had some old iron that made out of iron, like. And you set these irons on top of the kitchen stove to heat them up. We had to heat these irons to iron your clothes.
So the orange was hot. So the orange was real hot.
Yeah, and the whole time iron, they ironed good too.
That was good.
That's where we iron our clothes. We wash them in the tin cup. After they dry, we would iron them. And then, what else? We didn't have no refrigerator.
What you have?
We had something called an ice box. And we go to a place called an ice plant and get a big block of ice. Bring it back home, put it in this ice box to keep our food cold. And what else did you do?
You said your daddy raised hogs.
Huh?
Your daddy raised hogs. You said your daddy raised hogs. He raised hogs. Your daddy. What's your daddy do?
What my daddy did. My daddy raised hogs and chickens. And then he would kill these hogs. And that's how we had our meat and stuff. The hog had, when you cut up the hog, you had the bacon and grind up different parts of the hog, make sausages, make homemade sausages. And they had the pig feet, and hog head, all that stuff. Chicken. My mother, we raised chicken. My mother, when we wanted to have a chicken, my mother would go out there and wring the chicken neck off. So chicken be jumping up and down. She just poor chicken have a hard time. And just put him down in some hot water to get the feathers off the chicken. Clean the chicken and bring him in the house and cut him up, fry that bird. And then for bread, we didn't go buy bread. My mother made biscuits with some flour and some lard and baking powder. And some buttermilk. Make that dough, roll it out. Take a roller pin, roll that dough out, cut the biscuits, put them in a biscuit pan. And even this cold stove had an oven. Put them in the oven. And they were brown. It's like regular biscuits, you know. Yeah.
You said y'all had a garden? Y'all had a garden?
Yeah, we had a garden. My daddy would plant like greens and tomatoes and greens. What else? They do green beans. My mother plant okra. All right. Just regular vegetables.
Right.
And sometimes they make cornbread.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have no jiffy cornbread like we had. If you go get buy some cornmeal and make it with cornmeal and your baking powder and your egg and the milk, stir that up, make some cornbread, then put it in a big pan. In the big pan and bake it and then cut it in squares. A lot of times we ate that with white beans. White bean cornbread shit, we were living up. And then what else did we do? Crazy. I told we took a bath in a tin tub.
You took a bath in the tin tubs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I ate a. I try to think that people, some people had big wash bowls, but they just take like spun paper.
Mm-hmm.
But we had to heat the water though.
Right.
Heat the water for a bath and heat the water to wash our clothes and all. What else did we do?
You said you went to high school. When you go to high school?
I started out in 6th grade. I mean, in the 1st grade when I was 6 years old. I don't know what year it was.
Right.
But you went from the 1st grade to the 6th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 7th grade, you went to high school. I went to Madison Junior High School.
Oh.
I think I was on 18th Street. And then after we went to Madison until we got to the 12th grade.
Mm-hmm.
No. We went to Madison until we got. So we came out of school and we had to go to another school. I went to Central High School.
Okay.
I went to Virginia Avenue Elementary School. I went to Madison Junior High School. Then I went to Central High School. I graduated from Central High School in 1940.
You said the flood was when you was in high school?
The flood was in, I think, in 38. Yeah, 38, I think.
And you said it rained for a whole lot of days?
Yeah, rain for, rain just constant for about a week or so. And then the flood got a real high in some people's houses. And after the flood had all that mud and stuff to clean up.
You said
We had an old dead horse in the yard when we got home. We went up on Kirby, a street called Kirby.
You said they picked you up in a boat?
Yeah. When my daddy got us out on the boat, I forgot what house we were living in. But he was out helping everybody else to get out. And then we ended up having to leave in a boat.
Oh.
We went from that boat on 36th Street, I think. Or 36th Street. On up to 12th Street. In that boat.
What was the 12th Street?
And we stayed with my auntie.
Oh.
And they be so lumpy oatmeal and baby now when he eat it. And I remember Grandma Frazier, she tried to make Betty eat ham. Betty didn't want the ham. And she got to argue with Betty. She said she had like Charlie and Tom with tea and all that. She said they could have that for their lunch. And Betty didn't ask for their ham, and Betty didn't eat it. And Betty, from that day on, Betty would not eat no ham. That's that bad, Grandma.
From that day
on. She tried to make her eat the ham.
Right.
And and they would make bread. And my daddy didn't like white potatoes. And they would cook some potatoes and take the water off the potatoes and put in that bread to make them biscuits. I don't know whether they put milk in it or not, but these are potato water. To put in there. You don't have to tell the people that.
Don't tell the people that.
I'll tell the people that. And let's see. In our grocery store, you could go to the grocery store and buy. You didn't have to buy no whole lot of food. You can buy dime worth potatoes, a bag of cornmeal for about maybe 20 or 30 cents.
Be a big bag.
Buy some beans. Beans are being a big loose thing. You can just get how many you want, you know. They were real cheap. Like dried beans, like pinto, white beans, stuff like that. And go and get a piece of bacon. Well, we didn't have to get no bacon. My daddy had bacon from the home. I was kind of meat like that. We didn't buy too much meat. Yeah, for recreation, we would skate. Yeah.
Roller skate?
Roller skate.
You know how to roller skate?
We had old bicycles sometimes. Had to blow up the tires and things.
Did y'all have
the boys had coaster wagons.
Did you go to the roller rink to skate, or did you skate in the neighborhood? So y'all had a skating rink?
No.
Where's y'all skate at?
Like on the streets. Sometimes when too many cars coming, you know.
Right.
Like up Newman Street or something like that.
Okay.
But I guess I did have skating rink different places. So. And what else did we do crazy? We had an old record player that we had to wind up and play records.
Something else you said you was winding up.
No, we didn't have no electricity.
Right. So y'all didn't have no TV.
And we had them outdoor toilets.
You had outdoor toilets?
Yeah. What you call them, outhouse?
The outhouse. All right. Anything else you think about?
I'm thinking.
Did y'all have a car, or did y'all have?
My daddy had an old T model.
A T model car?
Old time car.
Right. Tell me something about the church. You said you had to stay at the church. What happened? Did y'all had to stay at the church for something?
When it first started, we went and stayed in the church for a couple of nights.
Oh. All right. Anything else you can think of?
Let's see. When a lot of children were born at home instead of the hospital, the doctor would come to your house.
He would.
In the old days, the doctor came to your house.
And have the baby and deliver the baby at the house. And he delivered the baby at the house. Well, that's different.
Yeah. What else? You said something about the army, huh?
About the army? Yeah, because
I think I had 4 brothers that went to the army one time.
what year?
Uh,
What year?
it was in the 40s.
Oh,
She was William and Alfred and Rawlins.
was they fighting in the war?
Hmm.
They fought in the war?
What did they fight?
In the war. Like, was it World War?
I guess they did. G was in the air.
In the Air Force?
G jumped out of the airplane. Air, what do you call that? Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what William and Alfred and Rawlins did.
You said y'all didn't do anything.
Uh,
Y'all didn't do anything when they was at the army.
what did we do? I worked at a factory down on 30th and Madison. Using the sewing machine, making different parts of shirts or something during the war.
During the war. Oh, okay.
I was called Kane or something like that.
How what?
Kane, I think.
Kane.
Anyway, they were doing the war, we were making different parts of shirts or something.
Anything else you can think of?
Yeah, we used to have to go to Sunday school, church. At 6 o'clock we go to BYPU, whatever that was. Like a little Bible study thing.
Yeah. Okay. All right, well, that's good. You taught me a lot.
So at the very end, they just kind of, you know, like, do you want me to do this again? So I'm stopping there. But what I wanted to say is I wanted you to note something. She talked a lot about food because, of course, that's what her strongest memories are of, is eating, because it's my grandmother. But one of the things that was really kind of essential that you should kind of gather from what she was saying was, if you notice every kind of street she named, every kind of, you know, numbered street especially, they're all higher than 9. Pretty much when it came to Black life in Louisville, you didn't leave past 9th Street. There was no reason to go downtown. Going downtown was like asking for trouble. Downtown was not an area that was meant for Black folks to be in. The image that's up on the screen right now is the relief station, which was on 13th and Broadway. And that is pretty much as far as a lot of folks went when it came to venturing towards downtown, because anything past downtown was not considered the Black area. And the Black area was, you know, affectionately called Little Africa, because every Black person was segregated into that area. And of course, that didn't change or improve any, even after, you know, the New Deal in the 40s, because my grandmother, of course, she got up to the point where her brothers went to the war. And of course, when they came home and they wanted to buy a home, they were still stuck living in that neighborhood. So what's key is everything that's kind of happens in that neighborhood. And so I have a few images of some, you know, things that were going on in Louisville, but everything that you see in the images, you have to remember, they're all in one little tiny pocket of Louisville. So Simmons University was one of the first schools that was that allowed Black students, and that was right in that neighborhood. Eventually, the University of Louisville would found their school, and it was still right in that neighborhood. So folks never left the neighborhood. They stayed in that neighborhood, lived and died pretty much their whole lives up until, maybe about the 60s, 70s, just because there was nowhere that would allow you to go. person who was Black in the city of Louisville. There was just not places and spaces for you to be. And this image here is the marker for Little Africa. Now, what's interesting about this marker is, of course, first off, it's poorly being upkept, but it's at the corner of Virginia Avenue and kind of the expressway. And my family has grown up in that area, for a lot of years. And of course, when I was a church that was founded by my great-great-grandfather, which was First Virginia Avenue Baptist Church. But that marker, is essentially just saying that, this is, considered Little Africa, and Little Africa was part of the, where Black folks settled after 1830, especially the free Black folk. My great aunt, who unfortunately, I was not able to, of course, get any of her, my great-great aunt, not able to get a recording of her. She lived right across the street from that marker as well. And what's key is she was one of the first individuals who lived in that area, because before then, that area was just kind of a really kind of a swampy, kind of just pressed area in the city of Louisville. And so if you kind of, look at this timeline for Louisville's housing segregation was a mainstay as early as, the 1800s. And then they officially made an ordinance in 1914. And that is when the Louisville branch of the NAACP was really founded to kind of combat this. Because there were some Black folks who were trying to venture out away from 9th Street in the area that's called Smoketown. Now, Smoketown is an area where I mostly in my, younger years as a kid grew up, and where my father grew up when his family officially moved to Louisville. And it is another little pocket of Blackness that was close to downtown, but was deeply segregated as well. So you didn't leave those neighborhoods. And one of the things I wanted, to kind of, point out, and what I feel is the most important to gather from what she was saying and talking about when she's talking about her youth, was that all of these things that she was able to have and they were able to do, they were all things that were, the grocery store was Black owned. You got your meat from a Black butcher. You went to school and it was an all Black school. There were no integrations. You didn't have to leave your neighborhood. And so, when she said, talking about the roller rinks, she's like, I guess there's roller rinks other places, but she didn't know, because she didn't ever have to leave, and she wasn't really allowed to leave. And so that's kind of one of the big things that I wanted to kind of, put in perspective, that she still lives in that neighborhood, not in the same house. She lives in one of my great aunt's houses that we've kept in the family over the years, but still in that same neighborhood. And the vast majority of the Black people in Louisville still live in that neighborhood. Yes, folks have ventured out, but the vast majority are in West Louisville. And so when you hear stories, about Louisville, or you might have, gotten interested in hearing about, Breonna Taylor, and you kind of was thinking about that, that is what the kind of upset and arguments about is how West Louisville is treated. It is underfunded. It's really cut off. Transportation is hard there. There's not a lot of grocery stores and things anymore. Since desegregation happened, we lost all of those things. So just imagine a neighborhood that there's one grocery store and it's servicing a large part of the Black community, just one. And if anything happens to that grocery store, then you have to go way out of the neighborhood to go somewhere else. And that is kind of the legacy that we're living with from the past that hasn't changed. And so when people are talking about, oh, that stuff's in the past, it's old, it's not true anymore, things are different, we're still living with that legacy. That redlining that happened in the 40s and the 30s and the 1830s, it's still here. It's just no longer being enforced, but its legacy is lasting because that's where people are. So I want to give time for any questions if anyone had any. And I know, there's also the question, our famous resident, well, what about Muhammad Ali? Which is what a lot of people know. And I just want to say, of course, Muhammad Ali was born in 1942. And he was one of my mother's peers. She called him Marcellus for some reason. I don't know. But they were friends. And the thing is, those houses you saw, that's his home. And it's still there. And all those houses that are around it, same houses. Nothing has changed there. It's still stagnantly set in the way it was. And so when we're thinking about the legacy of race and desegregation and segregation and all of these topics, we need to keep in mind that these things are still alive and well and here. And we're living with that legacy. And that's what we're trying to figure out a path forward from. Any questions?
Well, first, a round of applause. Thank you, Miss Tiffany. Appreciate that.
Yes.
So does anyone have any comments, feedback, any questions?
Hey, Tiffany.
Lots of applauses.
Yes.
Hey, Tiffany, how often do you go back and visit? How do you like it there? What does it feel like there for you?
I intentionally left Louisville for the very reasons why I'm kind of stating, how I feel about the legacy of what Louisville is like. When I go back home, I do feel the comfort because it's the comfort of the familiar, of family, of, these streets that I'm walking when I'm at home are the same very streets that my aunts and uncles and my great aunts all lived in, and especially their homes, because they still mostly own the very first homesteads that were built. So wow. They're still living in those houses. They built those houses themselves because there were no builders in West Louisville. If you want a house, you need to find a friend who knew how to build, or you built it yourself. So they're still in those homes. And so I see that legacy and that richness of history in the very walls of the houses, but it's hard to be there because I know the other half of that, the, situation with Breonna Taylor, that is nothing new. That is common. That happens a lot in Louisville. It's just that was the first time that it got on a national stage. There are at times, in places and things that there's parts of the city I won't go to this day. That were on my list of places that my mother wrote down of, you can't go here, you can't go here, you can't go here, you can't go here, because it's not safe. And that still happens. And so it just feels uncomfortable to be there. But I do try to go back when I can. And I plan to go back in April during the funnest time to be in Louisville, which is the Derby. But there's also a time when you see a lot of those inequities because a lot of the housing around the track starts to burgeon on that 9th Street area, and they try to cut them off from all the opportunities economically to kind of, make things, sell things. And so it becomes this resegregation that happens every Derby season. They'll block off the areas. It's hard to get into West Louisville and hard to get out. And so I don't really like it, but I am going back this year to just, see how things are.
Awesome.
I had a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of piggybacks off what Julie mentioned. But my first question is, can your mom hook me up with some Muhammad Ali paraphernalia if possible? Just kidding.
Ali paraphernalia.
I was just kidding.
Actually, my aunt might have some.
You know,
but she's actually in SoCal, so that might be easier to get.
No seriousness. Great presentation. I mean, it's fascinating just to hear grandma talk and the history of Louisville. Is crazy. But like Julie mentioned in the chat, I kind of had that same question. Is gentrification a growing problem in Louisville like it is out here? You know how, a lot of Black folk that were out here. My dad was in San Jose in the 70s, and even though it wasn't always a large population, but at one point it was around like 4 or 5%. I think now it's at 2 and decreasing. And of course, part of that is gentrification. A lot of, especially Black folk moving out to Stockton, Antioch, Pittsburgh, Newark, even Oakland's getting gentrified. They're moving out of there too. So is that situation occurring in Louisville as well?
That is happening in Louisville. And I kind of mentioned that when I was talking about Breonna Taylor in the Russell neighborhood. It's started off actually several years ago before I even left home, back in the early aughts. It started with, they started with the downtown area, that Smoketown area where I grew up as a kid, which used to be a very large bastion of African Americans, mostly because it was one of those little areas that if you were escaping the Deep South, you stopped at before you try to cross the Ohio River. And some people just stopped and stayed. So Smoketown is really close to downtown Louisville. It's a little pocket. It was really, really small, maybe, several streets. And then slowly they started like, oh, we're going to renovate. And so they started trying to buy up the houses really quick of the older Black residents who were still there. My uncle, one of my grandmother's brothers, lived in one of those houses, and he refused to sell until he died. So he was like the last house that they got finally once he passed away, because there was just nobody in the family who would take it and hold that house. Because typically what we did in our family is we hold the houses. So the house that my grandmother lives in, the house that my aunt lives in, at some point in time, those are mine, because we don't want to lose the little wealth that we've been able to maintain. But it started with that area, and then it slowly started encroaching over deeper into the west. And so now the area is kind of like right where that 13th Street image where that relief center is. That's where they're at now, which is a Russell neighborhood. So what was happening was they were issuing a lot of no-knock warrants in that area, which is what ended up happening with Breonna Taylor. And there's been a question of whether or not a lot of the no-knock warrants that they had been issuing was to get people out of that neighborhood. Because what then happened is people would get frustrated with them constantly coming over and busting into their homes. They would move. And then that house would get snatched up by a developer. So it's been a slow push to put people more west, deeper and deeper towards the river side of the West End, and southwest, which is an area that's kind of a little bit mixed, but it's a lot of poorer folks. So gentrification is happening, and it's happening rapidly. And it's happening in a lot of cities, and especially cities where they had larger populations of Black folks.
Thank you. Yeah. Fascinating to even hear that all around seems like all around the US it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of have a follow-up question before we stop. I just kind of piggybacking off of that. Did you notice, like, over your time there, the destruction of predominantly Black neighborhoods, like for things like, I don't know, freeways or other things like that?
In the 1960s, the freeway they decided to build, and other neighborhoods, they kind of built them around the houses. What they decided to do with West Louisville was eminent domain. And so they took people's houses and put the expressway right in the middle of the neighborhood. So they are cut off. And when they were thinking about building a coal ash dumping ground, the Louisville Electric Company, of course, West Louisville was on the top of lists of locations they could go. There's also the DuPont chemical plant that they built in that area, which was actually not far from the house that I lived in when I was in middle school. And you could smell it some days. And we all know that probably folks in that area are suffering from probably more comorbidities because of that chemical plant, because we don't know what they're processing over there. And it's on not far from my grandmother's house either. And so it's not, easy to stay in Louisville if you, find yourself living and stuck in the West End. And to answer Ellen's question about, do I see any solutions to that? The solutions that I see are kind of the work that some of my friends back home are doing. My friend Chanel Helm, who is one of the spokespersons for Black Lives Louisville chapter, she and some of the things that they've been doing with the money that they have collected from folks like myself and other individuals is they've been trying to buy up things before developers can. So the way they're trying to combat gentrification is by, okay, you want to leave? Let us buy your house. So that way we can put another family in there and it doesn't leave the neighborhood. Because what ends up happening is when we do lose properties, they tear them up and they make these mixed use housing, but nobody who lived in that neighborhood can afford to go back. And they're supposed to have, so many low income units and things, but when you start investigating, out of maybe 100 available units, it'll be 4 low income units, maybe 5. And that seems to be the pattern of how West Louisville works. And how Louisville is deciding to handle its revitalization. So it's a problem. And, the only solution I can see is doing exactly what my friends are doing, is buying up what you can. Any other?
Tiffany, oh, go ahead. Someone had a question?
No, I was going to ask that all the questions.
Well, thank you, Tiffany, so much for kicking off our Black History Month series at Community Connection Hour. And just listening, kind of like Iffy said, to your grandmother, it just made me think of my, dad and my dad's side of the family. And if my dad were here today, he'd be 100. And did you say how old your mom was, your grandmother?
My grandma... Okay, now you see how she was hedging on her age? Like, oh, I don't remember. Who is this? She be lying, okay? She's an unreliable narrator when it comes to how old she is. She is 5 years older than what she's telling people, because I don't know why, but seeming like she's over 100 is just too much for her.
That is so beautiful. What a treasure to still have her. Well, and FLCs, do you have anything you need to share, or any library staff that are here, or any community partners, any announcements that you'd like to make of upcoming events?
I just want to say thank you to Tiffany for sharing her grandmother and her family with us. This is amazing to hear history live. So that was awesome. So thank you. And I also did want to mention we have the VITA tax program starting up at Hillview. Gonna get crazy for a few weeks, but we're gonna hang in there. We got things ready to go. It starts on Saturday. People have to come to the library on Saturday to sign up. Sign up start at 10 a.m. sharp. 20 spots at each for each date, and it's gonna go all the way Saturdays from 2 to 5 for the actual program until April 9th. So if you guys know anyone that needs VITA tax help, they have to make $58,000 or less. They can file their taxes with VITA tax, or get assistance to get their taxes done.
Awesome. And what about the COVID coming up?
We also have a COVID town hall, and that's going to come up on February 23rd, and it'll be at 5:30. We're working on a flyer. We're going to be adding the special event to Biblio events. So if you guys want information on the latest health updates, or if you have any questions, please join us for that as well. We'll also send an email out to everybody on staff that would like to attend and also ask questions. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all for listening to me ramble.
Yes, you're getting lots of love and thank yous in the chat box. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for coming and have a wonderful afternoon. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Many long years ago, now with the Spirit, now of my Savior, I was filled